Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Alex, and today I'm going to explain why I'm drawn to the horror genre as a whole in my first long-form essay titled Horror and Hopepunk. I think it'll provide a helpful framework for future videos, since my channel was originally going to be about the horror, suspense, and mystery media that I enjoy. That will probably continue to be my focus moving forward in terms of my media analysis content, since most of the videos that I've planned for the next several months are horror-based. Therefore, it'll be important to understand where I'm coming from and how I approach the genre. My relationship with the horror genre was complicated. The genre was almost entirely banned when I was growing up due to fundamentalist fears of inviting real demons into our home and a garbage in, garbage out mentality. For many people, the satanic panic of the 1980s never really ended. I was allowed to watch Scooby-Doo, The Little Vampire, and horror comedy films such as 1948's Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. I could read the Bunnicula series. Don Knotts starred in a quirky and macabre movie called The Ghost of Mr. Chicken, which came out in 1966, and starred alongside Tim Conway in a kooky murder mystery entitled The Private Eyes, which was released in 1980. I enjoyed watching 1959's House on Haunted Hill, starring Vincent Price, in a story about 5 people who have been invited to a party at a haunted house and must spend the night trapped there to receive prize money, somewhat similar to 1976's Murder by Death or 1985's Clue. It was acceptable to watch classic television shows such as Bewitched, I Dream of Jeannie, The Munsters, and The Addams Family, including the 1990s movies with Christina Ricci. I was attracted to the work of Christian horror authors. Yes, that is a subgenre. And in middle school, I became obsessed, much to my eventual chagrin, with the Twilight Saga and its resulting YA franchise, after which I tried to pretend that I was no longer interested in vampires. Ever since a childhood trip to Disneyland and California Adventure, my favorite Halloween movie has been 1977's Tower of Terror, starring Kirsten Dunst. For much of my life, the scariest movie I'd ever seen was Alfred Hitchcock's 1963 film, The Birds. Horror was defanged, laughable, and family-friendly, or it was religious in inspiration, presenting demons through a fundamentalist Christian lens. In those cases, I was meant to understand the plight of the main characters as either examples of how to conduct myself in spiritual warfare against real demons, or an example of what to avoid in my life to keep myself safe from infernal attacks. As one might imagine, such an off-limits attitude made horror more compelling to me, and prompted several questions. Just how exactly did watching a horror film invite demons into someone's home? Are there demons whose sole job it is to keep on the lookout for humans watching horror movies so they can pop by? What about repeat viewings? Does each rewatch invite another demon, or does only the first instance count? How could there be enough demons to do all this, as well as all the other things demons are supposed to get up to? Can a demon refuse an invitation, such as if they're too busy or if they're not feeling particularly spooky on that occasion, or if they're focused on trying to come up with new scare tactics like a diabolical incarnation of Monsters, Inc.? What about all those horror buffs whose homes don't seem to have become epicenters of hellish activity? Surely we'd hear new examples of a horror fan's home being turned into an actual nightmarish site of unspeakable terrors all the time, right? Why are so many parents comfortable letting their kids watch horror films if they're so dangerous? Surely they can't be totally oblivious to their child vomiting pea soup or whatever else demons do to torment people, can they? Why are so many parents comfortable letting their children dress up as Freddy, Jason, Ghostface, or Chucky for Halloween if they're icons of the actual devil? and I have to shift because my leg is falling asleep. Okay. For that matter, why didn't the shows I watched count as morally corrupting given their content? Scooby-Doo, popularly a franchise geared toward children, still contained vaguely supernatural occurrences in its original series, but with its direct-to-video films in the 1990s and early 2000s, vampires, zombies, cat deities, voodoo curses, ghosts, and witches were all portrayed as real threats the Scooby Gang faced. Age demographic aside, why was it acceptable to watch Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost or Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island, but not something like Resident Evil or The Haunting? Why was it okay to enjoy Star Wars, a family staple, where characters use the Force to guide their actions, sense the thoughts and feelings of others, move objects telekinetically, and appear as ghosts? The Pirates of the Caribbean films contained Aztec gold cursed by heathen gods, undead skeleton pirates, a magical compass, the mystical summoning of a sea monster, undead fish pirates, disembodied hearts that still beat, and people betting against their own souls, not to mention a very unchristian afterlife. The Lord of the Rings included wizards with magical powers, as well as demonic entities such as Balrog, Shelob, and Sauron himself, but my family had encouraged me to watch it when I was a kid, and I hadn't been remotely interested in it because they were accurately confident that I'd love it if I gave it a chance. I used to sneak peeks at the covers of horror VHSs, and then sometime around when a local Blockbuster closed down, DVDs at the video store. It's since been turned into a real estate office, but at the time, the horror section was to the right of the doorway, a makeshift alcove composed of metal shelving that could be easily bypassed in favor of the children's section. I'd glance out the corner of my eyes as I'd pass by. 2005's remake of The House of Wax always stood out because of the melting face. And as time went by and the house showed no signs of becoming the next Amityville, I began peering through the stacks in the family section to study the cover of horror films better. I also used to sneak off to the horror section of the bookstore, keeping an eye out in case my parents were in the vicinity so I wouldn't get caught standing in an area of the shop that was surely filled to the brim with inappropriate material. All on alert to avoid detection, I'd run my eyes over the spines of Stephen King novels since he was the only mainstream horror author I was really familiar with. When there still seemed to be no signs of demonic activity at home, I also began vanishing into the religious section of the Barnes & Noble to try looking at copies of the Quran, which in my mind at the time were just as evil as copies of The Exorcist were supposed to be. Still, when nothing suspicious began to happen at home, I started to actually touch the books, making sure to be extra cautious, checking all around me to ensure that neither of my parents had walked into the area since I'd last done reconnaissance, and summoning all of my courage in case this was it. This was the line that, once crossed, would result in a demon coming through the TV like Samara in The Ring. I reached out with a finger, had actual physical contact with a book that I was sure would never be allowed in the house. I don't remember which book was the first, but I do remember touching a copy of the Quran in the back of the Barnes & Noble. There was still nothing. Of course, mind you, this was a process over several years. I wasn't always a child when I conducted my unprofessional research. I was a middle schooler, even a high school student. The pivot point. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Around my senior year of high school, when my parents weren't home, I got onto my Netflix account and began to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It was nothing like what I'd expected. Buffy was only a cheerleader for a single season 1 episode, and so much better than I'd ever thought horror could be. I hadn't known that horror could be about something. I thought it was just empty thrills and gratuitous gore. I hadn't known that it could be funny or clever or heartwarming. I hadn't known it could make me cry. I certainly hadn't known that it could be inspirational or help me understand the world a little bit better. And without Willow and Tara, I don't know if I ever would have started the process of becoming an ally and then realizing, much less accepting, my own identity. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as well as its spin-off series Angel, for all of Joss Whedon's confirmed and alleged faults, changed my life for the better. The present. From there came Supernatural, Lucifer, and Winona Earp. I watched Hannibal and Hulu's What We Do in the Shadows. I discovered Mike Flanagan's shows through its adaptation of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. I then picked up the novel and devoured it. Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Sir Terry Pratchett became one of my favorite stories, and I was delighted by the TV adaptation. Of course, that's all a little more complicated now, and I struggle with what to do with the positive things I gleaned from that story on a bigger scale than I do with the good things I learned from the works of Joss Whedon. Thanks to AMC, I became obsessed with Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles. Along the way, I figured out that horror television tended to be more appealing to me than horror films, for one main reason: hope. In many horror films, no matter what anyone does to rid the world of the villain for good, said villain will always come back in a sequel because they are the draws of their franchises. The trauma and sacrifices of the film's protagonists are often rendered pointless by the sequel when the monster returns, either in its original form or because someone else took up the mantle. As a result, those movies feel empty to me, devoid of any real meaning. They are what I once believed all horror to be, existing for shock value with no real depth. The suffering of the protagonist is just the fallout of the gorier and cliched spectacle of the monster's newest revenge plot. The only reason I can see for why these films still get produced is because they become safe box office draws, which doesn't provide me any motivation to go watch them. What is the point of the protagonist's anguish if all their hard work to survive and defeat the monster is undone by the mere existence of a sequel, especially if their surviving characters don't return? This is something that I will give the Halloween franchise credit for, since Laurie Strode returns repeatedly to show how her experiences in the first film continue to impact her decades later. The status quo in horror franchises tends to get reset, though, with returning monsters finding new victims to prey upon with generic excuses for their return to justify the new movie's release. There doesn't seem to be any real hope in these stories. I was criticized once in the past by someone who found the lack of hope in these films more realistic and implied that I was being naive by wanting hope in horror stories. I could ask myself why it matters so much to me, though I think the answer is simply that I need hope in horror just like I need hope in real life. Realism be damned. To reference C.S. Lewis, of all people, since I can't stand him, and not just for what he did to poor Susan, I don't need a movie to tell me that dragons exist. I need to know that they can be beaten. The pointless suffering of the protagonist bothers me, perhaps because I grew up believing that all suffering would ultimately serve a grander purpose and be made worth it in the end for believers. But I'm also just an empathetic person who can only stomach witnessing the pain of the protagonist if I think there's some kind of hope for them. I could be as wrong about these horror franchises as I am or was about horror as a genre. I'm also not opposed to watching some of them at home, though probably just the originals. I consider watching Halloween just for Jamie Lee Curtis and Scream from Matthew Lillard, who I first saw as Shaggy. In contrast to those horror franchises, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is about the Scoobies facing monsters to symbolize the obstacles we face in adolescence. Angel is about the Angel Investigations team fighting monsters to serve as metaphors for the challenges we face as adults. Winona Earp is about the extended Earp family dealing with the concepts of family legacy and how to let go of the past. The Haunting of Hill House is about the Crane family learning how to deal with their trauma. The titular house is a vehicle for exploring how trauma can impact whole families and for how people who have been through more or less the same situation, in this case, the Crane family's final night at Hill House, will still have different perspectives about what happened and will respond to their trauma differently. Supernatural is about Team Free Will going up against monsters to stand for intergenerational trauma and repressive control, including, ultimately, God himself. These are the stories about the people who fight the monsters. They might suffer dearly in the process. There may be stray bullets, sacrifices, demonic viruses, falling pianos, hellhounds, homemade bombs, tacos that taste funny, beheadings, stabbings, and falls in the shower. There might even be bad writing, such as swarms of bugs, racist ghost trucks, and rusty nails. And yet, these characters carry on the fight. Even shows like What We Do in the Shadows and Interview with a Vampire, which are ostensibly about the monsters themselves, are still really about people, about found families, identity and authenticity, the complexities of morality, and what makes life worth living. What does goodness look like if you're in a situation where morality is inherently tricky to define or adhere to? Is there really good and evil at all, or is morality just aesthetics, making the universe a savage garden? Why continue living a life that might never end? And how do we decide who to spend all that time with? Hannibal, for all that one main character is a cannibalistic serial killer who seduces the other main character, a troubled FBI profiler with extreme empathy, into becoming a cannibalistic serial killer himself, is still about love. As the aforementioned seduction isn't just a metaphor. Hannibal Lecter and Will Graham, two isolated and lonely individuals who have always struggled to form meaningful relationships with other people, want to not just understand others, but be understood themselves. And for all that their relationship is hallmarked by manipulation and violence, they're also able to find in each other the intimacy, acceptance, and connection they've always craved. These stories don't exist just to push the envelope on how gruesome a character's death can be, or to line the pockets of a studio executive. And Jasper, my youngest, is crashing the screen a little bit. I think you saw his tail. They exist to explore the different facets of the human condition, using the genre as a vehicle to delve into the nature of our existence and all of its wondrous and horrendous expressions. We can see the best and the worst of ourselves in these characters, our triumphs and our shame. And in our willingness to watch their journeys, we can confront our own selves and, by doing so, affect our own lives. In using horror to hold up a mirror to human society, we also elevate storytelling as an art form. Hope in horror. People have expressed confusion over the years about how I can find hope and courage in stories that are surely nothing but sadness and terror. It's true that I grieved when Buffy found Joyce dead or when Tara was killed, and I won't rewatch The Body or Seeing Red. Similarly, I mourned for Doyle, Darla, Cordy, Fred, and Wesley, as well as Ellen, Joe, Crowley, and Meg. Here's some supernatural hot takes. Benny deserved better than getting beheaded. Gabriel should have survived Apocalypse World. And it was foolishly irresponsible of the writers to kill Charlie off in the way that they did. Bella and Ruby's deaths made me sad too. This is how I find hope. In the season 2 finale of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Buffy is taunted by the season's big bad Angelus, who mocks her by asking her what she has left since he's taken away her friends, her family, and her hope. She closes her eyes, prepares herself, and blocks the killing blow. She opens her eyes, glares up at Angelus, and says, "Me." She then gets up and continues to fight. In the season 3 opener, when trapped in a hell dimension, a place described as utterly devoid of hope, where people gradually lose their individuality as they're stuck in slavery, Buffy is asked who she is. It's another instance of mockery, since she's supposed to be losing herself inside the system. But Buffy looks up and grins and replies, "I'm Buffy, the Vampire Slayer. And you are?" She then fights back and frees the other people trapped with her. She led a rebellion at the end of the season, the terrified but steadfast Sunnydale class of 1999, up against a giant snake demon, formerly known as the town mayor, and his army of vampires. In season 5, she gives a wonderful speech about the nature of power when declaring her continued autonomy as a Slayer, and at the end of the show, she asks us, "Are you ready to be strong?" Throughout its 5 seasons, Angel taught the audience that we're not our worst selves, that it's not up to us to decide whose soul is worth saving, the importance of connection with other people, and that atonement isn't a finish line. After temporarily giving up on the idea of fighting evil the right way, convinced he's just playing his enemy's game and not doing any real good, Angel decides to fight fire with fire. He allows Darla and Drusilla, 2 vampires he used to travel with as part of the Whirlwind, to have a massacre, and goes so far as to lock their victims in the room with them to prevent escape. When Angel is subsequently shown that evil isn't some corrupting influence from a hell dimension that he can destroy, but is instead in the hearts of every single person on the planet, he temporarily gives into despair, only to hit rock bottom and arrive at an epiphany. He needs to help others for their sake, not to earn redemption for himself. He tells us, if there's no great, glorious end to all this, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. Because if there's no bigger meaning than the smallest act of kindness is the greatest thing in the world. Castiel is an angel described as having a crack in his chassis, because he's prone to rebelling against orders if they don't seem compassionate towards humans. A fellow angel, Samandriel, declares that too much heart was always Castiel's problem. Time and time again, Castiel puts orders aside in order to do what he believes is the right, loving thing to do. He gives Dean the idea to put Chuck, supposedly a prophet of God, in a room with Lilith so that an archangel would appear to defend Chuck against the demoness in order to rescue Sam from her. He later jailbreaks Dean so that he can try to stop Sam from falling for Ruby's manipulations, and stays behind in order to try to hold off an archangel that he knows is far more powerful than him. And later makes a deal with Crowley to spare Dean from having to return to the hunting lifestyle, and gives up an army of angels to save Dean. Castiel was first introduced to Supernatural in the season 4 premiere as the one who gripped Dean tight and raised him from perdition. And after 11 seasons of going to great lengths to protect Dean Winchester, Cass's last act on the show is to save him one final time. He admits to Dean that he learned to care about the world through witnessing Dean's own compassion, and that he's in love with him, thereby experiencing a moment of true happiness that allows himself to be killed to protect Dean. Dean himself, despite the unfortunate appearance of a piece of rusty rebar, teaches us about personal authenticity, finding joy in the midst of suffering, and that we don't have to be who our parents made us. He's the one who declares screw destiny, and who, over time, decides that he doesn't have to be a good soldier or daddy's blunt instrument, and can be, instead, whoever he wants to be. He is the one who gives Cass the courage to defy heaven, and who teaches him that people, families, are what matters. He insists that freedom, even if it means tragedy and loss, is still preferable to being a Stepford bitch in paradise. Dean is the one who tells Crowley and the rest of us regarding Bobby. A wise man once told me, family don't end in blood. But doesn't start there either. Family cares about you, not what you can do for them. Family's there for the good, the bad, all of it, even when it hurts. That's family. These are just 4 examples out of many possibilities, but I think they illustrate my point. There is so much more to these stories than pain and tragedy and loss. There's also comfort and inspiration. The protagonist's determination to always keep fighting is a persistence that we can use in our real lives. Most of all, there is hope. Hopepunk. A few years ago, I came across the term Hopepunk and its definition, and I thought to myself, that's it. That's what I've been talking about all this time, why I love stories like these. Hopepunk is a subgenre of speculative fiction that shows optimism, gentleness, kindness, and collaboration to be effective weapons in the fight to create a better future, per dictionary.com. Vox has a wonderful article detailing Hopepunk from December 27th, 2018, as does Den of Geek from November 17th, 2019. Per Aja, I hope I pronounced that right, Romano for Vox. Depending on who you ask, Hopepunk is as much a mood and a spirit as a definable literary movement, a narrative message of keep fighting no matter what. If that seems too broad, after all, aren't all fictional characters fighting for something, then consider the concept of hope itself, with all the implications of love, kindness, and faith in humanity it encompasses. Now, picture that swath of comfy ideas not as a brightly optimistic state of being, but as an active political choice made with full self-awareness that things might be bleak or even, frankly, hopeless. But you're going to keep hoping, loving, being kind nonetheless. Through this framing, the idea of choosing hope becomes both an existential act that affirms your humanity and a form of resistance against cynical worldviews that dismiss hope as a powerful force for change. In the Season 3 episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer titled Gingerbread, Angel and Buffy have a discussion about the fight, as in the fight to protect Sunnydale and its people from the monsters that relentlessly plague it. Buffy is facing a moment of insecurity after having been asked if Sunnydale is really a safer place because of her role as a Slayer, since being one lone person up against various supernatural evils, Buffy can't save everyone. This is especially crucial since Buffy didn't choose to become the Slayer in the first place, but it's her calling nevertheless. Being the Slayer is her life's work, which will only end when the monster has, as Spike puts it, one good day. And because in the show, Buffy's acceptance of being the Slayer is a metaphor for her acceptance of growing into adulthood. This referendum on Buffy's performance as the Slayer and its impact on the safety of Sunnydale citizens is, therefore, a referendum on Buffy's own life in more ways than one. What's the point to slaying and consequently to Buffy's life if she can't save everyone? Is she doing enough good, saving enough people to justify putting her life on the line night after night, knowing that any night could be her last, and that if she's particularly unlucky, she could become another monster terrorizing the town? She and Angel agree that the fight is never truly over, and that it's impossible to win against evil completely, but that's not the point. We fight because there's things worth fighting for, Angel says, adding, I learned that from you. On his own show, Angel faces his own gingerbread moment of self-doubt and despair, out of which he teaches us about the power of the smallest act of kindness. The show's own ending addresses this. Angel and his surviving companions, including Spike, are in an alleyway facing off against a giant army of monsters drastically outnumbered. Spike asks Angel if there's a plan. Angel says they'll fight. Spike says he'd like a more specific plan, and Angel replies, well, personally, I kind of want to slay the dragon. He raises his sword, the monsters charge, and Angel moves to lead his friends into battle with, let's go to work. Cut to black, and the series is over. That's it. The series ends with Angel and his friends entering into yet another fight against evil, and we don't see how it ends on screen because that's not the point. The willingness to fight evil against impossible odds is in itself the point, because win or lose, there's things worth fighting for, and if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. The Vampire Lestat is the 1985 sequel to Interview with a Vampire, in which Lestat takes over the role as narrator from Louis. In universe, this is partially because Lestat has some grievances about how Louis chose to depict him in the infamous interview with Daniel Malloy, and therefore Lestat has decided to amend the record by sharing not just his own side of the story, but also his background leading up to the events of Interview in an attempt to explain himself. This starts something of a trend in the books in which various characters take turns to the narrative in an attempt to prove that their perspective is the correct one, or to just explain themselves things that other characters might not have known about them that colored their decisions. Lestat serves as the main narrator for the rest of the series, with some exceptions. A few characters taking over the narration in a handful of places in Lestat's books, while others, such as Armand, get their own novels. Throughout his first turn as narrator, Lestat references the witch's place in terms of great despair and hopelessness. He was raised in Rouen. I think I got that right. I don't know why I struggled to say that word. Backwoods France, in the years before the French Revolution, is the youngest son of a poor aristocrat. The first time the witch's place is mentioned, it's in a conversation with his childhood friend Nikki, once the two of them have reunited as adults. And, pardon my complete lack of any sort of French accent. But no matter how deadening was this sarcasm of his, a great energy poured out of him, an irrepressible passion. And this drew me to him. I think I loved him. Another 2 glasses of wine, and I might say something absolutely ridiculous like that. I've always lived without beliefs, I said. Yes, I know, he answered. Do you remember the story of the witches? The time he cried at the witch's place? Cried over witches? I looked at him blankly for a moment, but stirred something painful, something humiliating. Too many of my memories had that quality, and now I had to remember crying over witches. I don't remember, I said. We were little boys, and the priest was teaching us our prayers, and the priest took us out to see the place where they burnt the witches in the old days, the old stakes and blackened ground. Ah, that place, I shuddered. That horrid, horrid place. You began to scream and to cry. They sent someone for the Marquise herself because your nurse couldn't quiet you. I was a dreadful child, I said, trying to shrug it off. Of course I did remember now. Screaming, being carried home, nightmares about the fires, someone bathing my forehead and saying, Lestat, wake up. But I hadn't thought of that little scene in years. It was the place itself I thought about whenever I drew near it. The thickened blackened stakes, the images of men and women and children burnt alive. Nicholas was studying me. When your mother came to get you, she said it was all ignorance and cruelty. She was so angry with the priest for telling us the old tales. I nodded. The final horror to hear they had all died for nothing. Those long-forgotten people of our own village, that they had been innocent. Victims of superstition, she had said. There were no real witches. No wonder I had screamed and screamed. The witch's place comes up again just a few pages later, again with Nikki, as the two of them discuss their beliefs, or lack thereof, about the afterlife. But I had stopped laughing. I stood still, and I understood perfectly what I was saying. There was no judgment day, no final explanation, no luminous moment in which all terrible wrongs would be made right, all horrors redeemed. The witches burned at the stake would never be avenged. No one was ever going to tell us anything. The witch's place appears again after Lestat has been kidnapped from his home in Paris with Nikki by Magnus, who abducts him out of the city and holds him prisoner before forcibly turning Lestat into a vampire, in a scene that makes the rape metaphor distressingly clear as Lestat tries and fails to fight him off and is metaphorically drugged into compliance before committing suicide by fire. Lestat wakes up the first night after these traumatic events, sobbing and praying to God for mercy, desperately pleading and terrified of what's happened to him and what he's become. Then I lay flat on the stones, murmuring not prayers any longer, but those inarticulate pleas we make to all that is powerful, all that is holy, all that may or may not exist by any and all names. Do not leave me alone here. Do not abandon me. I am in the witch's place. It's the witch's place. Do not let me fall even farther than I've already fallen this night. Do not let it happen. He then recalls Magnus's talk of hell and briefly considers suicide himself. But even as I forced myself to imagine the agony of this, I knew I had no intention of doing it. After all, why should I do it? What had I done to deserve the witch's fate? I didn't want to be in hell even for a moment. I sure as hell wasn't going to go there just to spit in the face of the Prince of Darkness, whoever he might be. On the contrary, if I was a damn thing, then let the son of a bitch come for me. Let him tell me why I was meant to suffer. I would truly like to know. Lestat takes a while to develop a counter to the witch's place, his philosophy of the savage garden, and he keeps having to amend his previous resolutions due to later attacks on his resolve. He's not an outlier in this regard. Buffy, after her unasked-for resurrection in the beginning of Season 6, suffers from extreme depression. Angel wrestles with severe losses in the 5th season of his own show, losing Cordelia and Fred. Castiel and Dean both fall into despair several times over the next 11 seasons of Supernatural. Katie Burt, for Den of Geek, declared that Hopepunk is believing that humanity may not be inherently good, but we're not inherently bad either, and that giving people the chance to prove themselves compassionate is a worthwhile choice. Alexander Rowland, who first coined the term Hopepunk in July of 2017, wrote an essay for Festive Ninja called One Atom of Justice, One Molecule of Mercy, and the Empire of Unsheathed Knives as a sort of follow-up retrospective to the Tumblr post that started it all. In a commissioned article, she initially said, in July of 2017, I coined the term Hopepunk, initially defined very simply in a Tumblr post. The essence of grimdark... My apologies. When asked to clarify, I wrote, the essence of grimdark is that everyone's inherently sort of a bad person and does bad things, and that's awful and disheartening and cynical. It's looking at human nature and going, the glass is half empty. Hopepunk says, no, I don't accept that. Go fuck yourself, the glass is half full. Yeah, we're all a messy mix of good and bad, flaws and virtues. We've all been mean and petty and cruel. But, and here's the most important part, we've also been soft and forgiving and kind. Hopepunk says that kindness and softness doesn't equal weakness, and that in this world of brutal cynicism and nihilism, being kind is a political act, an act of rebellion. Throughout the piece, she expresses weariness regarding the continued insistence on hope in a world that often feels hopeless, as well as fear that she'll one day give up and start being nice instead of being kind. She worries that she'll become complacent in the face of seemingly never-ending cruelty and decide to hide from brutal reality by using niceness as an excuse to stop struggling for a better world. In other words, she has a gingerbread moment. She's in the witch's place. I think there are two different ways of saying the same thing. This is what she says as she starts to find an answer to the question that Buffy faced in Gingerbread, Angel faced in Epiphany, and that Dean Castiel discussed in Lucifer Rising. How do you do it? How do you manage when the task before you is enormous and impossible? How do you do it? How do you go on? Here's how you start a fire with 2 sticks. Sheer, simple, bloody-minded obstinacy. That's how you count the stars, build a library, and go to the North Pole. That's how you hold the story even when it's unraveling in your hands. You grit your teeth and bear the pain and keep going. 1 star at a time, 1 brick at a time, 1 step at a time. You can do a lot when you decide to be a stubborn motherfucker who refuses to die. Alexandra then says that the fight itself is worth it, like Angel's answer in Gingerbread when he says that there are things worth fighting for. In the series finale of Angel, Not Fade Away, Gunn comes across an old friend, Anne Steele, as she's loading a truck full of donations for a local outreach shelter, and he asks her, what if I told you it doesn't help? What would you do if you found out that none of it matters? That it's all controlled by forces more powerful and uncaring than we can conceive, and they will never let it get better down here. What would you do? She simply replies, I get this truck packed before the new stuff arrives. Before the new stuff gets here. Want to give me a hand? After all, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. And the series itself ends showing that the willingness to fight in itself is the point. Following her recommendation to be a stubborn motherfucker who refuses to die, Alexandra elaborates thusly. It's not about glory or noble deeds. It's not about an end result because there is no end. There's always a tomorrow, and when the sun rises again, we'll still have a dam holding the water back. For now. But entropy is real, and dams must be maintained, and it takes all of us to do it. And it's done by linking arms with the people next to you, by building a community with deliberate intent. It's about how the first step to slaying a dragon is for one person to say, probably drunk in a bar somewhere, I bet it can be done, though. It's about being kind merely for the sake of kindness, and because you have the means to be, and giving a fuck because the world is, somehow, mysteriously, against all evidence, worth it. And we don't have anywhere else to go anyway. It's about digging in your heels and believing that one single atom of justice, one molecule of mercy, does exist somewhere in the mind-boggling vastness of the universe. Believing in that, even if for no other reason than fuck you, buddy, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I do what I want, and this is what I want. This is the world I want to live in. One where the atom of justice exists, even if I've never seen it myself, even if I'll never see it. It's about doing the one little thing you can do, even if it's useless. Planting seeds in the midst of the apocalypse, spitting on a wildfire, bailing out the ocean with a bucket. Individual action is almost always pointless. Hope and strength comes from our bonds with each other, from the actions we take as a community, holding hands in the dark. Or getting a truck packed before the next delivery arrives. Standing side by side in an alley, waiting for the monsters to arrive. The Scooby Gang, Angel Investigations, Team Free Will. Teams working together to accomplish more than each individual could on their own, supporting each other and helping each other endure the horrors, finding strength in community. It's even in how Anne Rice's vampires begin to set aside their differences and grudges to form a society of their own in the final books. And drink break. This isn't like a paid anything, if you can tell what drink this is. I just like it, and if I'm going to keep reading, I need something to drink. Hopepunk isn't pristine and spotless. Hopepunk is grubby, because that's what happens when you fight. It's hard, it's filthy, sweaty, back-breaking work that never ends. It isn't pretty, and it isn't noble, and it isn't nice. Though I expect a natural inclination, and even my own instinctive inclination, is to make it so. To forget the word radical in the phrase radical kindness. To forget the punk part of Hopepunk, which is really the operative half of the word. To forget the anger of it and let it soften. Because softness is what we're aching for. We want the world to be better, kinder, more just, more merciful. We still yearn toward noble bright, toward an honest and desperate belief that love conquers all. Except when the other guy has more guns and fewer moral objections than we do, it doesn't. We forget sometimes that we have knives too in this empire, that we can unsheath them, that we can turn our blades to the defense of an atom of justice and a molecule of mercy that might not even exist, except for where we make them exist, in the hands we hold out to each other, and in the shelter we offer even when we ourselves are exhausted, footsore, and filthy with the wolves at our doors. There are no heroes and no villains. There are just people. That's Hopepunk. Whether the glass is half full or half empty, what matters is there's water in that glass. And that's something worth defending. In an interview with Playboy from 1968 with Eric Norden, in which Stanley Kubrick discussed 2001: A Space Odyssey as a man who wrote about a disastrous space mission despite being terrified to fly in a plane, Kubrick discussed his fear of flying. He explained that he refused to fly in planes because doing so made him have to confront his own mortality and how insignificant his life felt compared to the grandness of the universe. Eric followed up by asking Kubrick if he believed that life is worth living, and Kubrick's response was the following speech. The very meaninglessness of life forces man to create his own meaning. Children, of course, begin life with an untarnished sense of wonder, a capacity to experience total joy at something as simple as the greenness of a leaf. But as they grow older, the awareness of death and decay begins to impinge on their... Jasper! This is Jasper. He is my youngest, and he is wanting attention. So, can you say hi? Can you say something? You're in, yeah, no? Okay. Sorry. As they grow older, the awareness of death and decay begins to impinge on their consciousness and suddenly erode their joie de vivre, their idealism, and their assumption of immortality. As a child matures, he sees death and pain everywhere about him and begins to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of man. But if he's reasonably strong and lucky, he can emerge from this twilight of the soul into a rebirth of life's elan. He may, both because of and in spite of his awareness of the meaninglessness of life, he can forge a fresh sense of purpose and affirmation. Both because of and in spite of his awareness of the meaninglessness of life, both because of and in spite of his awareness of the meaninglessness of life, he can forge a fresh sense of purpose and affirmation. He may not recapture the same pure sense of wonder he was born with, but he can shape something far more enduring and sustaining. The most terrifying fact about the universe is not that it is hostile, but that it is indifferent. But if we can come to terms with this indifference and accept the challenges of life within the boundaries of death, however mutable man may be able to make them, our existence as a species can have genuine meaning and fulfillment. However vast the darkness, we must supply our own light. In other words, hope, the antidote to despair, the catalyst that inspires us to create meaning out of the meaninglessness and indifferent cruelty of the witch's place. Hope is something that motivates us to always keep fighting for a better world, even if we never see it ourselves, to battle the monsters no matter what. After everything else was set loose from Pandora's box, hope was what remained. The light of hope and the need to keep creating it, to keep acting as though hope is real no matter how bleak it all seems, is what I found in these works of horror. It's there in Buffy's resolve to keep fighting even when Angelus has taken everything from her, when she's trapped in a hell dimension, when she leads an army of teenagers against a demon and his vampire army, when she rebuffs the Watchers Council and battles a hell goddess, and when she rewrites the rules of Slayerdom and asks us if we're ready to be strong. It's an angel's decision to fight evil, not for a reward for himself, but so that others don't have to suffer, becoming an agent of hope, willing to rush into battle against impossible odds, because opposing the oncoming army to save the world is the right thing to do, even if it's futile. He may never see the molecule of mercy or the atom of justice, but he'll die trying to create it for someone else. It's in Cass choosing to stay behind and attempt to hold off an archangel, and in freeing Dean in case there's even a tiny chance that Dean can stop Sam from being tricked into breaking the final seal in Lucifer's cage. It's in Dean showing up to Stoll Cemetery when Lucifer has possessed Sam in case there's the slightest chance that Sam can take back control of his body. It's in Cass and Dean's entreaties to each other in their darkest moments, trusting that they'll be heard when no one else has been, that they can get through to each other. It's in Lestat, enduring through the wolves, Magnus, the loss of Nikki, the fickleness of Gabrielle, and more besides, to create a life and a family in New Orleans, and then enduring again after it all falls apart. Alexandra Rowland's article for Festive Ninja, her creation and definition of Hopepunk, encapsulates what this kind of horror media means to me. How do I find hope as well as courage and comfort in stories of monsters and darkness? I see how the protagonists fight on, finding new ways to renew their resolve after periods of despair, never accepting that the world is too broken to fix, and never settling for being nice instead of kind. I see them insist on believing that a better world is still possible. Buffy, Angel, Cass, and Dean, as well as so many others, are doing in their worlds what Alexander Rowland recommends we do in ours. These characters inspire me to try. So, there it is. I went from being someone who snuck peeks at the covers of horror VHSs filled with questions because horror was banned in confusing and contradictory ways, to someone who finds hope, courage, and comfort in the genre. I went from knowing the genre was supposed to be evil to be inspired by several protagonists to make the world a better place. I went from believing that interacting with the genre would invite real demons in my life to terrorize me, to understanding that horror is just another genre with good and bad elements to it, just like any other genre, and that there's so much potential in horror to help people. I know that what's often crucial is how and why creators use the horror genre, which is also true to every other genre. I'm also willing to admit if more of my preconceived notions, such as about the value of slasher films, are wrong. Just because I've come a long way doesn't mean I don't still have miles to go. And while this video is about my evolving relationship with horror, since I did mention my childhood beliefs about the Quran, I feel it's important to clarify that I no longer think that way. I grew up believing that other religions are lies created by the devil, and that their adherents were unknowingly participating in demon worship, since I was taught that demons pretended to be the deities of other religions. I was taught that behind Zeus, Thor, Cyrus, and the Muslim version of God was a demon performing a role to trick the masses into not believing in the Christian God, and specifically the fundamentalist evangelical adoration. Therefore, the holy books of other religions were infernal in origin, filled with lies, and I was afraid to even look at one of them would single me out for spiritual torment. Now, I'm an atheist who is critical of how religion can be used to justify causing harm, but respects religion itself as a generally neutral phenomenon. And that's it for my horror and Hopepunk video. I hope you all enjoyed it. Next week, I'll be debuting my first big project, a series of video essays that I'm as excited about as I am daunted due to the sheer scale of it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for your support. Bye, everybody.